Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce a special guest on our show. We have with us today Dr. John Yu, who is the CEO of Kairos Pharma, a company focused on advancing therapies to overcome critical challenges in cancer drug resistance and immune suppression. This includes development of therapeutics that reverse cancer drug resistance in cancers such as prostate and lung cancer. Dr. Yu is also professor and vice chair of Neurosurgery, director of the Brain Tumor Center at Cedars, Sinai Medical Center. Dr. Yu has developed numerous immunotherapies and nanotechnologies from his NIH-funded laboratory. This includes 8 new investigational drugs with the FDA. Dr. Yu has also led numerous clinical trials as part of his work. Dr. Yu also served in leadership roles at several biotechs, including Immunocellular Therapeutics, and most recently served as CEO and chairman of Xtalks, as well as director of Therapeutics. Dr. Yu has an MD from Harvard Medical School and MIT, and he completed an immunology fellowship at the Institut Pasteur in Paris, France. So to hear more about the work Dr. Yu is spearheading in the oncology space at Kairos Pharma, let's turn to him now. Dr. Yu, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Ayesha. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Yu, where do I begin with your illustrious career? But I'd like to, take you back to your initial steps into the space of oncology as well as biotech, and how you really got into oncology biotech and what led you to Kairos Pharma eventually and today.
Sure. Well, I had the fortune of being living through history of some of the most interesting times in biology, from the advent of molecular biology when I was an undergrad at Stanford, and Stanley Cohen at Stanford discovered the ligase enzyme, and Herb Cohen at Berkeley and UCSF discovered restriction enzymes, and these put together really started molecular biology. And I was very interested in how molecular biology could really change the face of health with new drugs being made, biologicals of proteins and enzymes that Genentech was involved in. And I had the pleasure of being a summer intern there as an undergrad. And from there, I went to the Pasteur Institute and worked on immunology at this great institution where they discovered vaccines for cholera and for a host of other diseases, and also discovered the AIDS virus there. And so, this propelled me to be interested in immunology and cancer. And then by the time I went to Harvard Med School, gene therapy was a burgeoning area, and so I got interested in that and used that with my immunology and developed some gene vaccines at that point. Moved to Cedars Sinai and worked on other immunotherapies, including dendritic cell immunotherapy, and that's what led me to my lab and my interest in clinical immunotherapy.
Amazing. And as you said, you were there for some very pivotal moments when you talked about the discovery of restriction enzymes. That takes me back to the lab. And I think we often take for granted that all of these things, all of these tools that we have today, they were not there in the past. And there were people that brought these tools and so that we could bring things to life, and people like leaders like yourself are able to do the work that you're doing. So it's great to hear that journey and how it, comes full circle. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, we're standing on the shoulders of giants,
Absolutely.
and that's what allows us to look far into the future.
And you know what? You are one of those giants today. So thank you for all that you do,
Oh, that's
and
very
where you've
kind.
taken things for sure. And in terms of Kairos Pharma, um, I know that there's kind of a story behind the name, so I'd love to hear more about that from you. And could you talk to us a bit more about the company and what led you to Kairos and what the missions and goals of the company are?
Sure. Well, Kairos is a Greek term for the opportune moment or right time. And it had a lot of meaning for me in that our therapeutics really are designed to intervene at the right time when patients become resistant to a drug. It also really envelops what has happened with our company. We were always able to uh, uh, get funding at the right time in the nick of time. We're able to get our trial started, just in time. And so timing really has a lot to do with our company. And also it has a spiritual meaning of God's time. And so I really believe that has been a force behind where we've come so far. We've been interested in developing therapeutics for drug resistance in cancer because really we think it's a central problem in cancer, and that there are many drugs that are very effective for cancers, but unfortunately over time, over a year or two, these drugs become ineffective because of a central mechanism of resistance in CD105, which is a cell surface receptor that is involved in the development of resistance against a host of cancer drugs out there. And so we've worked on reversing this type of resistance with an antibody that targets CD105, and that's been our lead product till now.
Wonderful. And so, in terms of the target that you mentioned, CD105, is this upregulated in certain cancers to begin with, or is it after, or is it in response to drugs?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and we found that it's always in response to drugs. And so, as the tumor is treated with these drugs, this tumor becomes expressed more and more on the cell surface. It signals BMP, among other things, which is involved in a survival signal to the cell. And development of resistance to a host of different types of cancer therapeutics. And so we found this to be a central mechanism, not only for prostate cancer, but in a non-small cell lung cancer, where we're doing our other phase 1 trial. And we've also seen it in breast cancer and colon cancer. So really every cancer that we've looked in so far, it appears to have a major impact in drug resistance.
And so, this compound, ENV105, what phase of development is it currently in? And could you talk to us a bit more about some of the data that the company has for it so far? And you mentioned the indications that you're focused on, including non-small cell lung cancer.
Yes. So we are in a randomized uh, controlled trial with prostate cancer, and we've done a smaller phase 2 trial in prostate cancer where we found a 62% clinical benefit rate, and that means patients who had become resistant to abiraterone and enzalutamide, two commonly used anti-androgen agents, when they became resistant to it and the tumor grew, we added ENV105 to these drugs and found that 62% of patients had a response, a radiologic response, or a response in PSA to the drug. And this is in a situation where we'd expect 0% of these tumors to actually respond because they'd already become resistant and they were already progressing on those drugs. So based on these data, we went to a larger randomized phase 2 trial, which we're enrolling on now and adding up centers. Cedars Sinai. And we've also started a phase 1 trial, non-small cell lung cancer, in patients that are on Tagrisso for EGFR-dependent lung cancer. And we found this to be a mechanism of resistance for Tagrisso as well. Tagrisso is a drug that works really well in patients. As a neurosurgeon, I've seen responses in patients with 50 brain tumors, and these tumors melt away with this drug, and it's very effective. But oftentimes, in a matter of a year or two, patients become resistant to it. And so in this phase 1 trial, we're seeing if patients that have become resistant to Tagrisso then become sensitive to it again after we add ENV105. We also want to see whether patients that are incompletely treated with Tagrisso can then become completely treated and all of their tumors respond.
That's fascinating because when I was in grad school, I have a background in oncology. And I remember when we would talk about drug resistance, it was always about, all right, what other drugs can we throw in? What other pathways can we target? We can't target this pathway anymore. So let's turn to another pathway. Okay, shut that down, but then another one will pop up and become activated in response. But here, you're really targeting the mechanism of resistance. And so I think that's very fascinating and very elegant, very neat, and very important to do. And I think
I think we're taking a different approach. Like you say,
absolutely.
most people in the past, when a drug has become resistant, they've just targeted a different mechanism or a different pathway. But we're really targeting the central pathway of resistance here.
And it seems that this pathway is common to a lot of resistance mechanisms in a lot of cancers. And so that makes it kind of a universal drug that can be used across different oncology indications.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And is there any, when we talk clinically, is there any particular, for example, is there any way that this monoclonal antibody can perhaps be given ahead of developing resistance, or is it, how would you time it? I guess going back to Kairos,
we think it really starts expressing itself once the resistance starts occurring, and so we wouldn't think it'd be useful prior to the resistance occurring. So we really think it should be given after the resistance.
After the resistance develops. Okay, that makes sense. And as you said, Kairos' approach is quite unique and different from others in the field. And in terms of, I think you have a couple of other different compounds in your pipeline as well. Could you talk to us a bit about those?
Yeah. So we're also very interested in targeting immune suppression that tumors develop or that patients develop with cancer. And so one of the major problems in immuno-oncology is that although cancers number in billions of cells, we only mount an immune response with T cells in the tens to hundreds of millions of cells. And so there's a mismatch in the number of cancer cells with the response that the immune system makes. And so one of the drugs that we've developed is called Kairos 101, which targets GITR, which is a glucocorticoid-induced TNF-like receptor, which is a mouthful of a checkpoint inhibitor that's involved in the growth of T cells and of effector T cells that actually target these cancer cells. There are also a group of T cells known as Treg cells that are suppressor T cells. And so what this drug does is it rebalances the immune response to have more effector T cells and less Treg cells, so that the T cells that are mounted against the cancer can grow in numbers as well as in efficacy in terms of killing the tumor cells. So we're trying to rebalance the fight of the cancer cells and the T cells that respond to them.
Mm-hmm. And would that be given as a in combination with an immunotherapy?
Yeah,
to
so
enhance its effect?
it would lend itself well in combination therapies with other checkpoint inhibitors, Pembro from Merck or nivolumab from Bristol Myers. In that it would allow the T cells to grow in number as well as target the tumors better with the release of the checkpoints between the tumor and the cancer cells. So it should marry well with those types of therapies.
And so when we talk about the oncology drug development space, it's not only a very competitive field, but it's also very challenging. Cancer is there's so many unmet needs and so many different types of cancers and then subtypes. And although we have so many sophisticated tools now that we can identify different subtypes and stratify patients and all of that, it lends to even more complications and complexities, really, which makes oncology super interesting, but also very challenging. And so, as a biotech in this space, what are sort of the biggest challenges in developing therapeutics for patients, and then from early development through to you're surely looking at the regulatory side of things as well. When you get to that point. So how is the space in terms of how has it evolved in the past couple of decades in your experience, and where is it today?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, but as you suggest, cancer is so complicated and complex, particularly the war with cancer, because as soon as we develop a drug against cancer, it finds a way to obviate that drug and to overcome it. And so it's a constant battle and a constant warfare. And so we're always looking for the Achilles heel of cancer, the one thing that will really weaken its grasp on the body. And we think that EMV-105 is one of these things that really targets a central mechanism of resistance. And we're really trying to make cancer. It's hard to really think about, curing cancer, making somebody completely whole. But what if we can make these drugs work longer and more effectively so that cancer can become more of a chronic disease? In the day when AIDS first developed, it was a killer within a year. But now it's become a chronic disease that patients can live with for years and years on end. And so, I think we can start to think about cancer in that way too. And that can we make it so that we can target certain mechanisms that grab a hold of it and keep it resisting all these drugs so that we can allow the drugs to be more effective for a longer period of time. I think another challenge is, getting through that valley of death of development of these drugs. And when you ask me, part of the reason I went into biotech and this industry is because it was so frustrating on the other side in academia, where we were involved in development of these therapeutics, but it's really hard to get them into clinical trial and into patients. And the funding mechanisms right now with the NIH really don't allow you to cross that valley of death of really being able to test these therapeutics and get them into the clinic and start clinical trials with, which are exceedingly expensive and generally not funded by the NIH. And that's why we decided to do it ourselves, which is to get these drugs into patients that we think are very important. Um, and so that's why we went down this route of this company, and a public company at that.
Hmm. And that's very interesting because the two realms, very different, industry versus academia, and things happen very differently, work very differently. However, do you see that there is an increasing recognition, at least, of the importance of collaborations between the two spaces, and also with respect to Kairos, in terms of developing your pipelines? What kinds of partnerships and collaborations is the company engaged in?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think development of therapeutics has largely come from academics. historically in the U.S., and that's really evolved from the development of a very strong patenting system, intellectual property system, allowing inventors to really have to be able to produce something and to fund something so that investors can reap the rewards of it in the long run. And so there's always been a partnership with academics, with biotech, and with these smaller biotechs, with pharma too. And so we are exploring these potential partnerships. Obviously, our therapy, which is designed to work with other drugs from a pharmaceutical industry, would lend itself to partnerships with these large pharma companies. And so we're exploring these as we develop our drugs.
And how do you stay ahead, or at least, with at the cusp of innovation, let's say, in oncology, because things are moving so fast, so many moving parts. And so what does it take to really start up something like Kairos Pharma and to build it and to keep it moving as you are doing so wonderfully?
Well, there are a lot of challenges, and I think the main characteristics that is required is resilience. I mean, we've had a real down market in the biotech field for at least a couple of years, and it was exceedingly hard to get an IPO out. There are more occurring this year than last year, and so I think that's an advantage. But funding has been very dry. It was exceedingly difficult. But I think it's opening up a little bit, and I think that'll be good for the development of novel therapeutics. And really, America is leading the world in this area, and I hope the administration will support that going forward.
Indeed. And what changes have you seen on the regulatory side of things? Because I think a lot of companies, even in early phase development, it's advised that you have to start looking down that path early on. And so what do you think, and how have you seen things change on that end?
Yeah, I think the regulatory agencies have always been a challenge, with good reason. I mean, the United States has always been a proponent for safe drugs, even more than the efficacy of drugs, but efficacy too, of course. So it is a very stringent process, and so it's important to partner with the FDA very early on. I've found the FDA always to be very fair and very supportive, and they want you to succeed. And so, I don't think it's necessarily a adversarial relationship, but hopefully one that's collaborative to bring useful drugs to patients.
Indeed. And how have you seen the oncology space evolve over your time in the field? As you mentioned, beginning off talking about all of the innovations and discoveries in molecular biology that have allowed for a lot of the things that are happening today. And so, how have you seen things really evolve in oncology specifically? What do you think are the greatest unmet needs, as we all talk about, of course, drug resistance, which is what you're focused on. And then also, where do you see the field evolving in the next couple of years?
Well, I think one area that has been evolving and has become more and more important is the idea of personalized medicine, or precision medicine, and that you don't want to just give drugs to everybody, but you want to give drugs to those people that will really respond to that drug. And one of the important facets of that area is the idea of a companion diagnostic or a biomarker to determine whether a drug will work even prior to you giving that drug. And that's why we've really put a lot of emphasis in developing biomarkers for each of our drugs. We have a 3-gene assay for ENV105 that determines for prostate patients which patients will respond versus not. And this really allows us to decrease the number of patients that we enroll into a clinical trial, knowing that those patients will respond more effectively. And historically, that increases the likelihood of success of a phase 3 trial from 55% to 76%. And so I think it improves patient outcomes. It improves the likelihood that a patient will respond. And so I think it's important to develop these along with any drugs going forward.
Indeed. It's about delivering the right drugs to the right patients.
Yes.
For sure. So, yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that the fact that, biomarkers and development of companion diagnostics to go along with the therapeutics is very important and very big in the field, rightfully so right now. And so what can we expect from Kairos Pharma in the next couple of months, next couple of years in terms of milestones?
Sure. So as we roll out our phase 1 and phase 2, we're looking at safety data in the next couple of months and with some efficacy data soon thereafter in mid-2025 in our phase 2 trial and with our phase 1 trial as well in the upcoming year. We're developing Kairos 101 for an IND and for the clinic, and stay tuned for that. We're certainly always working on partnership opportunities, both for our preclinical assets as well as for our lead asset. And so that's an ongoing area of work as well. And so we're a small company with four employees with 3 scientists, but we think we have a therapy that's going to be really important for many pharmaceutical companies. And so we're working very hard to work with them to be able to get this to patients.
Indeed. Dr. Yu, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing all of the exciting work that is happening at Kairos Pharma. And we wish you all the best. And we will stay in touch and we'll keep our eyes peeled for updates from Kairos here at Xtalks.
Thank you, Ayesha. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Likewise. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.